King Charles has given an update on his cancer journey as he met with patients at a hospital opening in Birmingham.
It was October 9th, 2025, just after 7 p.m, when multiple sources inside Sandringham estate confirmed what the palace would not yet say out loud. The king had suffered a brief collapse following what aides called a difficult evening of family news. According to two senior insiders close to the royal household, the episode occurred shortly after King Charles received an update on Prince Harry's ongoing legal proceedings in London, a case that once again drew public attention to the royal family's most painful rifts. At almost the same time, Meghan Markle's appearance at a Paris charity gala, wearing a controversial tiara and delivering a speech that British tabloids described as pointedly independent, dominated international headlines. "He was watching the coverage," said one palace aide who spoke on condition of anonymity. "He didn't say much. He just stood there for a moment, and then he went pale. Within minutes he was on the floor." Medical staff stationed at Sandringham were called immediately. A royal physician confirmed that the king briefly lost consciousness before regaining awareness and was alert but weak. The following morning, Buckingham Palace issued a short, carefully worded statement. His Majesty experienced a momentary episode of lightheadedness and is now resting under observation. His doctors remain unconcerned. But according to one insider, the private tone inside the estate was far less composed. "It was serious enough to frighten everyone," the source said. "For the first time, we saw the staff move with panic, not protocol." By sunrise, the palace attempted to project normalcy. The king appeared in public, attending a small cancer charity event near Cambridge. His voice was thin, his complexion grey, and his smile practiced, fragile. He spoke briefly to patients, telling one woman, "I'm doing fine, just taking things slowly." A camera flash caught his trembling hand. Within hours, the photo was on every front page in Britain. Behind the scenes, however, the royal household quietly activated contingency coordination protocols, procedures typically reserved for serious health events. Meetings scheduled for later that week were reassigned to Prince William, who, according to two sources, was already functioning as acting head of several state matters. Princess Anne began reviewing correspondence from the Privy Council, while Queen Camilla stayed behind at Clarence House, managing press inquiries and reportedly clashing with senior aides over what she called unnecessary alarmism. One longtime courtier described the mood inside Buckingham Palace as fractured but focused. The Queen believes Charles can recover and return fully. William believes this is a transition. Anne is the bridge between them. Everyone else is walking on glass. This was not the first sign of strain. Over the past 18 months, palace insiders had grown accustomed to what they call the king's off days, moments of exhaustion, minor fainting spells, and unannounced cancellations. The trend began quietly after his 2024 cancer diagnosis, which the palace had described as routine and treatable. Since then, observers note, the king's workload has been dramatically adjusted. He skipped overseas tours, reduced ceremonial appearances, and delegated an increasing number of state duties to William and Anne. Behind the smiles, one aide confided, the king is managing not just treatment but heartbreak. Every headline from California lands on his desk like a stone. Camilla, according to multiple palace staffers, has taken a harder line, determined to preserve what remains of the king's public image. But even within her circle, doubts are emerging. One member of her team admitted that the Queen is under immense pressure, adding that her influence is being diluted by the natural shift toward William and Catherine. As the news cycle spun through the evening, royal correspondents noted that the palace press office refused to use the term incident, insisting instead on temporary fatigue. To veterans of royal reporting, that phrasing spoke volumes. When Buckingham says temporary, they mean ongoing. One journalist told the BBC off-camera, "By nightfall, Sandringham's gates were sealed, the king's movements restricted to the north wing, and his red boxes of government papers rerouted to Windsor. Sources confirmed that a private meeting between William and the Prime Minister took place via secure video link earlier in the day. No official record was released. Inside the palace, the silence was heavy. "The king is awake," one insider texted a journalist late that night. "But something's changed. The doctors call it recovery. The family calls it reality." And as Britain went to sleep, one question began to echo across newsrooms, living rooms, and the halls of power alike. Was this merely exhaustion, or the first visible crack in a monarchy quietly preparing for its next chapter? This is Sussex Side-Eye, reporting the story behind the statement. Stay with us, because this time, the silence inside Sandringham may speak louder than the crown itself. The king's collapse at Sandringham wasn't a shock to those closest to him. It was the culmination of a year quietly defined by doctors' appointments, rearranged schedules, and a monarchy slowly learning to operate without its sovereign at full strength. Palace records reviewed by insiders show that the first adjustments began in early 2024, the day Buckingham Palace released that carefully phrased bulletin. "His Majesty is undergoing treatment for a form of cancer detected early." It was the kind of announcement that made history precisely because of what it didn't say. There was no mention of type, stage, or prognosis. Only reassurance. But inside the walls of Clarence House, reality looked different. One senior aide, who had served both Elizabeth II and Charles, later told a reporter, "From that moment, every plan the palace made came with a second version, one that assumed the king wouldn't be available." The first sign of strain came in March 2024, when the king spent 3 nights at the London clinic. Officially, it was routine observation. Unofficially, a doctor confided that his treatment was aggressive, experimental, and left him significantly weakened. Still, within days, Charles was photographed waving from the back seat of a car, smiling through the glass. The image of stability, one court correspondent noted, crafted frame by frame. By summer, that image began to falter. At Trooping the Colour 2024, Charles appeared in the royal carriage instead of on horseback, the first monarch in living memory to do so. Aides insisted it was a practical choice, yet to many, it symbolised a turning point. His smile was warm, a military officer recalled. But his posture was smaller. The palace worked hard to keep morale steady. Queen Camilla's office expanded its communications team, instructing them to emphasize normalcy. Behind closed doors, however, insiders describe her as exhausted, anxious, and protective to the point of isolation. She controlled the king's diary meticulously, approving every meeting, even with senior family members. "Access to Charles went through Camilla," said one insider. "Not even William saw him without clearance." That control began to unravel in autumn 2024, when the king cancelled his scheduled tour of Australia and New Zealand. Publicly, the decision was framed as strategic scheduling. Privately, it marked a quiet crisis. According to a leaked memo reviewed by The Guardian, the king's doctors had recommended a significant reduction in transcontinental travel for at least 12 months. The implication was clear: the monarch was no longer fit for sustained international duty. In his absence, Prince William stepped forward. He attended the Commonwealth Leadership Forum, hosted diplomatic receptions, and began chairing weekly briefings at Windsor. It was the moment royal observers had been waiting for, a generational rehearsal for succession. But this time, there were no trumpets, no coronation plans, just a silent redistribution of work. One official described it as a soft shift, not ordered, just happening. Then, in March 2025, came the second hospitalization, officially brief, unofficially worrisome. Doctors described complications from treatment. When he emerged 2 weeks later, Charles appeared frail but defiant. At a charity event in Cambridge, he shook hands with patients and told them, "I understand a bit of what you're going through." To many, That moment cemented his image as both monarch and patient, a living symbol of endurance. To his staff, it was the confirmation that a full recovery was unlikely. In the months that followed, the palace quietly trimmed the king's workload by more than half. He stopped attending Privy Council meetings, delegated weekly briefings to Anne, and reduced state audiences to essential only. At the same time, William's schedule expanded dramatically. More public engagements, more policy coordination, more visibility. By June 2025, aides began using a new term in private briefings: managed monarchy. It described a system in which the king remained the symbolic head, but his heir effectively ran operations. Not regency, not abdication, something in between. The adjustment extended beyond logistics. Inside the palace, lines of loyalty shifted. Staff who once reported to Camilla now funneled information directly to William's team at Kensington Palace. Communication strategies began emphasizing the Prince and Princess of Wales, their children, their stability. It was subtle, said a palace PR consultant. A new visual hierarchy emerged, Charles and Camilla in soft focus, William and Catherine in sharp relief. The Queen consort, never one to surrender quietly, pushed back. In several internal meetings, she reportedly argued that the monarchy must not look leaderless. She urged more visibility for the king, photographs, televised appearances, carefully scripted statements. But after the second hospitalization, doctors advised strongly against any increase in public exposure. Camilla, according to one long-time aide, felt cornered, the king fading, her relevance slipping, and William's team gaining ground. By mid-2025, a confidential internal note, referred to by aides as the guidance document, outlined new operating procedures. It gave Prince William temporary authority over domestic duties, Princess Anne oversight of constitutional correspondence, and Queen Camilla ceremonial representation only. The document wasn't classified, but it was never meant for public eyes. It was the moment everyone realized, one senior staffer said, that we'd crossed from recovery into transition. Outside the palace, the British press began piecing the puzzle together. Words like co-leadership, soft succession, and shadow regency appeared in headlines across the BBC, The Telegraph, and Sky News. Public sentiment, surprisingly, remained calm. A YouGov poll in July found 72% of Britons supported William, taking on greater responsibility, calling it the modern and humane approach. Note: for a nation raised on stoic continuity, it felt almost revolutionary, a monarchy adapting rather than resisting. Yet not all were comfortable. Veterans of the Elizabethan court privately warned that informal regencies risked confusion and division. One retired equerry said, "The system is built for clear moments, death, succession, coronation, not for this grey zone of living decline." Inside Sandringham, where the king now spent most of his time, the atmosphere grew quieter. His days began later. The red boxes still arrived each morning, but aides say many remained unopened. The window of the north wing became his ritual, his seat by the light, the one Queen Elizabeth once favoured. Visitors describe him as reflective, at peace, and detached from daily management. Charles doesn't talk about governance anymore, one insider shared. He talks about gardens, architecture, memory, and time, mostly time. By the start of autumn 2025, the managed monarchy was no longer theory. It was reality. William operated as acting sovereign in all but name, Anne as guardian of continuity, and Camilla as the public face of tradition. For Britain, it was a new kind of reign, one that didn't begin with a death, but with a decision to keep the crown breathing, even as its bearer slowed. And through it all, one truth echoed across every corridor, from Buckingham to Sandringham. The king was not gone, but the kingdom was already adjusting to life without him. By late July 2025, palace corridors no longer buzzed. They whispered. Something had been written, distributed to only 3 people, and locked in the royal vaults at Sandringham, a single-page directive known among staff as the guidance note. No announcement, no ceremony, just a quiet instruction from a weary king to those who would carry his burden forward. 3 senior insiders, speaking independently, confirmed its existence. It wasn't abdication, one said. It was contingency. A monarch deciding how to keep the machine running without pretending to steer it. The note, handwritten by King Charles that spring, was brief and deliberate. It appointed Prince William to assume temporary authority over domestic and public duties, Princess Anne to manage constitutional affairs, and Queen Camilla to represent the crown in ceremony only. One courtier who saw it called it a map for the inevitable. Another was more blunt. It moved power without moving the throne. For weeks, its existence was palace folklore. Until early August, when a well-placed source leaked its summary to a political correspondent at The Guardian. The headline broke the following morning: Private Royal Directive hints at temporary transfer of power. The palace responded swiftly. No structural change to the monarchy has occurred, the statement read, the language tight and defensive. But insiders knew the denial was procedural, not personal. The palace couldn't confirm it, one staffer said, because the king didn't rescind it. The document still stood. Almost overnight, changes began to appear in small, precise ways. Prince William's name replaced his father's at the top of internal briefing papers. Foreign envoys addressed him as acting head of state in correspondence. Weekly government audiences shifted quietly to Windsor, chaired by the prince. And yet, the official narrative remained. The king continues his duties with support from his family. Behind that public calm, the human friction was unmistakable. Camilla, blindsided by the directive, reportedly found out days after it had been signed. She was devastated, said one aide who has worked with her for over a decade. Not because she wanted power, but because she thought she already had trust. At a private reception in Clarence House later that month, she was overheard telling a confidant, "I will not be treated as a guest in my own court." That quote never appeared in print, but its sentiment rippled through the palace like a tremor. Publicly, Camilla maintained composure, smiling at literary events, greeting schoolchildren, appearing alongside the Duchess of Gloucester for charity engagements. Privately, she fought to keep influence. She pressed communications teams to ensure her presence in every royal bulletin and photo release. But palace insiders describe a woman increasingly aware that visibility no longer equaled authority. Her circle is shrinking, said one veteran courtier. She still has allies among the old guard, but the institution is moving around her, not with her. By mid-September, senior staff began to talk openly of dual leadership. To some, it was efficient, a modern arrangement balancing age and adaptability. To others, it was an administrative coup cloaked in courtesy. One insider summarized it quietly: the king was never pushed. He just stepped aside before anyone could pull. And as power recalibrated, loyalty fractured. Elizabethan courtiers sided with Camilla, defending continuity. Younger aides aligned with William's team, drawn to his clarity and quiet control. Emails were rerouted, press approvals shifted, and Kensington Palace began to dictate messaging once coordinated through Clarence House. The monarchy's architecture hadn't changed, but its wiring had. Even linguistically, the transformation was visible. Palace staff began saying, "The prince has approved," instead of "the king requests." One senior secretary noticed the shift in official memos and simply murmured, "That's how it begins." Meanwhile, at Sandringham, Charles spent long hours at his window in the North Wing, the same spot his mother had once favoured. Visitors describe him as reflective, serene, detached from the noise. "He knows what's happening," one insider said. "He designed it. He just refuses to dramatise it." In early October, during a private family weekend at Balmoral, Charles reportedly spoke candidly to Anne. "The crown is sound," he told her. And that's all that matters. Anne's reply, according to one source, was soft but final. Then let it rest, Charles. Let it pass where it belongs. Within days, William took his father's place in a scheduled meeting with the Prime Minister, not as a stand-in, but as the de facto decision-maker. Downing Street confirmed the meeting as a continuation of routine engagement. No fanfare. No portrait changed. But from that day forward, every royal directive bore one signature: Wales. The system had adapted. The monarchy had evolved. And Camilla, the woman who once helped rescue its public image, was now learning what happens when an institution built on order begins to move without permission. She's hurt, admitted a family associate. She feels erased, but she also knows Charles has made his peace with the inevitable. That inevitability was now visible in every photograph. William, composed and steady, standing before the cameras as Britain's future. Anne, efficient and unwavering, the custodian of continuity. And Camilla, smiling as always, though her smile no longer reached her eyes. By the end of that month, the guidance note had become the monarchy's quiet constitution. It wasn't published, but it didn't need to be. Its truth was visible everywhere, in the silence of a king who no longer commanded, in the poise of a son who no longer waited, and in the shadow of a queen who suddenly had nowhere left to stand. "It's not abdication," said a senior aide one evening, as the Sandringham lights dimmed. "It's architecture. Charles built the bridge himself, and now he's watching William walk across." Outside, autumn wind swept across the Norfolk lawns, scattering the last of the summer leaves. Inside, the palace clock ticked steadily on. No bells rang. No proclamations echoed. Just the sound of a monarchy shifting quietly, but unmistakably, into its next reign. By October 10th, 2025, Britain found itself in one of those rare, weightless moments in royal history, a week suspended between reassurance and reality. The King's collapse at Sandringham earlier in the week had been confirmed, stabilised, and softened by the palace's language, resting comfortably under supervision. There were no new images, no further statements. The gates remained shut, the flag unmoved, the silence deliberate. But inside, the atmosphere had changed. According to multiple palace insiders, the document known privately as the guidance note was no longer just a plan. It was being followed in practice, quietly, without announcement. No one used the word succession. No one dared call it a regency. But decisions were now routed differently, and that alone spoke volumes. "It's not official," said one senior aide, "but it's being lived. That's the British way. Constitutional fiction that everyone agrees to keep real." Publicly, Buckingham Palace repeated the same phrases. "His Majesty is in good spirits and looks forward to resuming duties soon." Behind the scenes, those duties were already being carried out by others. Government correspondence, traditionally addressed to the King's private secretary, was redirected to the Prince of Wales's office at Kensington Palace. A Downing Street official described it as an administrative courtesy. Inside the palace, aides called it what it was: the beginning of shared control. The media, smelling history, circled like hawks. BBC anchors spoke of a soft transition unseen since George III. The Telegraph called it the quietest constitutional moment in modern Britain. Even normally cautious voices at the Times ran the headline, "The Crown rebalances." The palace, in turn, denied everything. The King remains sovereign. The Prince continues to support. But one insider described the real tone behind those words. They're not lying. They're just not finishing the sentence. At Sandringham, the King remained unseen. Staff were instructed to keep the estate's routines steady. Curtains drawn at specific hours. Kitchen deliveries rerouted to the rear gates. Visitors say the mood is reverent, almost monastic. "He's reading, writing notes, sometimes walking," one confidant said. "But mostly he's thinking. You can feel it, he's stepping back, one thought at a time. In London, the rhythm of monarchy carried on. Prince William met with advisers twice this week, including representatives from the Cabinet Office and the Ministry of Defence. Princess Anne chaired a short audience with Privy Council members. Together, they are running what one official calls a fully functional crown, minus the crown. No announcement has been made, and none is expected. The beauty of the British system, said a former government advisor, is that power transfers through paperwork, not ceremony. All the while, Camilla's absence became its own kind of headline. Her last public appearance, a short visit to a children's reading charity, was 5 days ago. She has not been photographed since. Officially, her team says she is focusing on the King's recovery. Unofficially, staff hint at fatigue, frustration, and an uneasy awareness that the ground beneath her has shifted. "She's been through so much," said one courtier. "She knows the cameras, she knows the pressure, but this feels different. This is about relevance." Tabloids have begun to fill the silence with speculation. Some claim the Queen has been left out of key briefings. Others suggest she is deliberately withdrawing to avoid the optics of a divided court. No one from Clarence House has confirmed or denied these reports, but insiders describe a new dynamic: cautious, distant, professional. "William and Camilla are polite," one source said, "but they no longer need each other. Their orbits have separated." Among the public, emotion has softened into pragmatism. Outside Buckingham Palace, small clusters of well-wishers leave flowers and cards reading, "Get well soon, Your Majesty." Oh! A few hold photographs of Charles with the words, "Thank you for your duty." The mood is not panic but quiet acceptance, the sense that the institution is adjusting itself, as it always does. A woman in her 70s told Sky News, "He served his time. Let the boy help him now." Inside government, the arrangement has already taken form. The King continues to receive daily updates, brief, written, and carefully curated. Prince William now conducts most audiences with ministers and foreign dignitaries. The coordination between Kensington and Sandringham is described by one insider as seamless but unspoken. Anne handles ceremonial paperwork. Camilla manages personal correspondence. The crown moves slowly, invisibly, through 3 sets of hands. No official step has been taken toward a regency, and none is being considered. Senior staff emphasize that the King's recovery remains the focus. No, but even those closest to him acknowledge that the timeline for a full return grows longer by the day. One aide put it simply, "He's not fading, he's letting go." What happens next remains a question no one will ask aloud. If his health improves, a gradual reappearance, perhaps at Windsor or a Christmas broadcast, could restore the familiar rhythm. If not, legal scholars note that the Regency Act of 1937 provides a framework for temporary delegation, though invoking it would be politically delicate and emotionally seismic. For now, everyone agrees to live in the ambiguity. An advisor to the King described the current state with quiet precision. "Nothing has changed. Everything is changing. Both are true." Enten. For the British public, it is a moment of collective restraint. No panic, no drama, just a kind of national inhaling before whatever comes next. The newspapers still call him His Majesty. The anthem still begins with "God Save the King." But in private offices, quiet corridors, and handwritten notes passed across desks, another truth hums beneath the ritual. The monarchy is already preparing for the next version of itself. The lights at Sandringham remain low. The estate sleeps under Norfolk fog. Inside, a king rests, not dethroned, not diminished, simply waiting. And in the silence of that waiting, Britain listens, unsure whether it's hearing an ending or the first breath of something new. By the evening of October 10th, 2025, the air around Sandringham had turned still. There was no new bulletin from Buckingham Palace, no public image of the King since his brief appearance days earlier. The official line remained the same. His Majesty continues to rest and remains in good spirits. But inside government offices and royal residences, there was a quiet understanding. The crown was now being carried, not by one man, but by a system adjusting itself to his absence. At Downing Street, aides described the current arrangement as working perfectly well. Ministers now meet weekly with Prince William, who has taken on the bulk of the Crown's constitutional duties. No official word has been given on the scope of his authority, but insiders confirm he now reviews documents, signs, correspondence, and advises on matters of state, in conjunction with the King's wishes. It is cooperation disguised as continuity. Princess Anne remains the steady hand, practical, invisible, and fiercely loyal. Every morning, her car leaves her residence precisely at 8, bound for Windsor or Westminster, depending on the paperwork waiting on her desk. She's the hinge, one senior aide explained. When William moves too fast, she reminds him what tradition demands. When Camilla feels isolated, Anne keeps her tethered. The Queen herself has not appeared publicly since early in the week. Those close to her say she spends long hours reading and taking calls from friends at Ray Mill House, her private refuge in Wiltshire. She still speaks to the King daily, usually in the evening. Her voice calms him, said a household insider. Even now, she's the one person who can bring him peace. Yet even her supporters admit that her influence within palace operations has waned. The structure now runs on quiet consensus between William, Anne, and the King's senior private secretary. Among courtiers, the word transition is never used aloud. Instead, they say the adjustment. It's the same tone used in 2022 when Elizabeth II scaled back her duties in her final months. Different health, same rhythm, a slow managed handover disguised as ordinary governance. Across the country, Britain has responded with its signature calm. Newspapers speak softly of continuity. Television presenters use the word recovery more than succession. There are no protests, no frenzy, only sympathy, patience, and a quiet admiration for a monarch who worked until his strength refused him. At shop windows and train stations, screens still flash "God Save the King," but for the first time, that phrase carries the sound of both prayer and farewell. Inside Sandringham, those who have seen Charles describe a man at peace. He reads the morning papers, takes brief walks with his dogs, and occasionally dictates letters to be sent to charities he still supports. The doctors are satisfied with his progress, though aides admit he tires easily. "He's alert," said one close servant. "He just doesn't push anymore. He says it's William's time now." There is no talk of abdication, no hint of formal change. But the outlines of a new order are already visible. William at the centre of the state, Anne as its backbone, and Charles, still the king, yet somehow already a figure of history, watching his legacy in motion. In quiet moments, staff say the king reflects on his mother's final year. "She always said the monarchy must move before it's moved," one aide recalled. He's doing the same thing, making it easier for the future to arrive. And so the institution moves on, not through revolution, but through rhythm, the slow adjustment of duty, the silent inheritance of purpose. Britain, ever composed, continues to breathe through the familiar rituals, the anthem, the flag, the promise of stability. Yet beneath that calm, everyone senses what history will one day record plainly, that the reign of Charles III began with conviction and ended with grace. The cameras will return soon. Perhaps a statement from the palace next week. Perhaps a photo of the king walking the gardens again. For now, there is only waiting, the kind that carries both gratitude and goodbye. And when the next chapter begins, whether it is announced or simply lived, it will be remembered as the moment when a father handed his duty to a son without ever speaking the words. Thank you for watching and staying with this story, for following it through the silences, through the uncertainty, through the human weight behind the crown. If you've been moved by this journey, remember to like, share, and subscribe for future updates as the monarchy turns another page. Because history doesn't always arrive with fanfare, sometimes It walks quietly through Sandringham and leaves the world holding its breath.